The 25 Most Amazing Paintings by Edvard Munch. Number 25. The Storm. 1893. In the last decade of the 19th century, European art was undergoing a transformation, and Edvard Munch became one of the most innovative figures of the day. The Storm, painted in 1893 AD, is one of his most enigmatic and atmospheric works, where nascent expressionism blends with a deep psychological sensitivity. In the scene, a group of female figures stand, enveloped in a pale, spectral light, while the wind shakes their surroundings. The dark sky and cold colors convey a sense of impending catastrophe, intensifying the emotional charge of the work. The use of light in this painting is fundamental. Munch creates a strong contrast between the ethereal whiteness of the women and the density of the night, achieving a sense of isolation and vulnerability. The loose brushstrokes and the distortion of forms reinforce the impression of a world in constant change, in which nature and the human psyche are intertwined. Although the storm is a physical phenomenon, Munch makes it a symbol of the inner turmoil of his characters, a resource that he would use repeatedly in his career. This technique of expressing the emotional through the natural environment became one of his hallmarks and would mark the development of expressionism in the 20th century. From a narrative point of view, the storm reflects the artist's interest in intense emotions and the subconscious. Munch was influenced by symbolist literature and the emerging psychology of his time, which translates into the scene's atmosphere of mystery and anxiety. His approach to anguish and isolation had a profound impact on later artistic movements, such as German Expressionism. The image of these spectral figures caught in the storm remains one of the most evocative depictions of human fragility in the face of uncontrollable forces. Number 24. Workers on the Way Home. 1914. In the early years of the 20th century, the world was on the brink of unprecedented transformation. Industrialization was proceeding at an accelerated pace, and World War I would radically change society and art. Against this backdrop, Edvard Munch created Workers on the Way Home, a work that moves away from his harrowing psychological explorations to focus on a raw depiction of working-class life. In the scene, a group of workers march forward en masse, with vacant stares and rigid bodies, conveying a sense of exhaustion and alienation. The dark, earthy color palette emphasizes the monotony of their existence, while the expressive brushstrokes lend an air of urgency and hopelessness. Munch here takes a less introspective and more social approach. The composition, with figures moving forward in an almost mechanical movement, evokes the idea of a depersonalized mass, absorbed by the routine of industrial work. In contrast to his more subjective works, in which individual emotion is the focus, this painting highlights the collective experience and condition of the working class. However, his expressionist style is still present in the way the figures seem compressed within the pictorial space, trapped in an inevitable fate. The sense of alienation and wear and tear is palpable, reflecting the harsh reality of workers at that time. In Munch's career, Workers on the Way Home stands out as one of his most socially engaged works. While his legacy is marked by his exploration of existential angst, this painting demonstrates his ability to capture the harshness of the modern world. Its depiction of workers' fatigue resonates with other artistic manifestations of the 20th century, influencing social realism and movements that denounced the working conditions of the industrial age. What makes it especially striking is the way in which, without losing his expressionist style, Munch achieves a universal image of the routine and oppression of work. Number 23. Two Human Beings, The Loners. 1899. In 1899 AD, Edvard Munch created two human beings, the loners, one of his most introspective and melancholic works. Framed in the context of symbolism, this painting reflects loneliness and emotional detachment at a time when the social transformations of the late 19th century brought with them an existential crisis in art and philosophy. Norway, Munch's native country, was experiencing a period of political and cultural change, in which the artist found in painting a means to express human anguish. This work is in line with his most personal creations, influenced by modernism and nascent expressionism. In the scene, two figures stand in a desolate landscape by the sea. The distance between them is more psychological than physical. Although they are close, they do not interact, but rather seem absorbed in their own thoughts. Munch's brushstrokes are fluid and ethereal, generating an atmosphere of melancholy. The cool tones and twilight light reinforce the feeling of isolation, while the silhouette of the woman dressed in red contrasts with the dark figure of the man, establishing a visual tension that accentuates the emotional separation. The horizon line extends with a disturbing softness, plunging the characters into a state of eternal introspection. This work is a clear example of Munch's psychological exploration, a recurring theme in his career. As in the Scream and Melancholia, here the artist seeks to capture universal human emotions through the symbolic use of color and composition. Its impact on art history lies in the ability to convey isolation in a visceral way, anticipating the themes that would dominate expressionism in the 20th century. The work, with its emotional charge and evocative style, remains a reflection of the internal struggle of the human being, caught between the need for connection and the weight of his own existence. Number 22. The Dead Mother. From 1899 to 1900. Between 1899 and 1900 AD, Edvard Munch painted The Dead Mother, a deeply disturbing work that encapsulates the trauma of childhood death and the fear of loss. Not only is this painting inspired by the artist's personal tragedy, who lost his mother at a young age, but it also reflects the fragility of life in the 19th century, when deadly diseases, such as tuberculosis, were a constant threat. The work is imbued with the anguish and despair that characterize much of his output, influenced by symbolism and early expressionism. The scene shows the corpse of a woman on the bed, while a girl, her eyes wide with terror, covers her ears as if trying to block out a non-existent scream. The claustrophobic atmosphere and dark color palette reinforce the feeling of dread and mourning. Munch does not seek to represent death in an idealized way, but rather exposes it in its emotional rawness, conveying helplessness and childhood trauma with a striking psychological realism. The vibrant brushwork and deformed shapes contribute to the feeling of instability, while the emptiness in the room accentuates the irreversible absence of the mother. This work is one of Munch's most personal works and resonates with the ongoing exploration of grief and anxiety throughout his career. The depiction of childhood grief and the emotional impact of loss have been recurring themes in art history, but few works manage to convey the intensity of the experience as The Dead Mother does. Its influence extends beyond symbolism, connecting with the expressionist movements of the 20th century. The painting continues to generate a visceral response in viewers, reminding us of the universality of human suffering and the inevitability of death. Number 21. Woman in Three Stages. 1895. In 1895 AD, Edvard Munch presented Woman in Three Stages, a highly symbolic work that explores femininity and its transformation throughout life. In the context of the 19th century, the vision of women was marked by traditional values, in which their role was idealized or condemned depending on their behavior. Munch's painting fits into this dualistic vision, reflecting the masculine perception of desire, innocence, and decadence through a composition loaded with meaning. The work depicts 3 female figures, each in a different phase of life. On the left, a young woman dressed in white symbolizes purity and innocence. In the center, a sensual woman with loose hair and a dark dress embodies passion and desire, with a posture that conveys confidence and attractiveness. On the right, a shadowy, aged figure appears hunched, like a specter representing the inevitable end of life and the loss of youth. The distribution of the figures and the use of color reinforce the idea of an inexorable progression, while the background, hazy and disturbing, suggests the passing of time and the fragility of existence. This work is one of the most representative of Munch's obsession with the human psyche and the passage of time. The duality between attraction and fear of women is a recurring theme in his work, also visible in The Kiss and Madonna. In this sense, Woman in 3 Stages anticipates the exploration of symbolism in the 20th century, influencing numerous expressionist artists. With its disturbing style and timeless message, this painting remains a powerful reflection on the human condition, caught between ephemeral beauty and inevitable decay. Number 20. The Death of Merit, 1907. At the beginning of the 20th century, Edvard Munch developed a series of works in which he explored the vulnerability of the human body and emotional distress, influenced by his own mental and physical health crises. The Death of Merit, painted in 1907 AD, falls within this period of artistic maturity, where the Norwegian artist reinterpreted a historical episode with a personal and disturbing vision. Inspired by Jacques-Louis David's celebrated 18th-century neoclassical painting, Munch transforms the scene into a much more symbolic and emotionally harrowing representation. Unlike David's sober and monumental composition, Munch deconstructs the scene, stripping it of any heroic idealization to emphasize the psychological drama. Munch's technique in this work is characterized by expressive strokes and intense colors, which emphasize the emotional tension of the scene. The figure lying in the bathtub, the victim of a murder, is less a realistic portrait and more an expression of human fragility. The chromatic contrasts between the pale skin and the reddish background reinforce the feeling of violence and suffering. Likewise, the visible brushwork and the oppressive atmosphere give an almost spectral character to the composition, immersing the viewer in an experience of unease. The figure's face, expressionless and with its eyes open, seems to convey a fatalistic resignation, which adds an even more disturbing nuance to the whole. Within Munch's career, this work stands as a testament to his ability to reinterpret the art of the past from a modern and deeply personal perspective. His obsession with illness, death, and existential anguish finds a particularly intense manifestation here, consolidating his legacy as one of the great pioneers of Expressionism. Curiously, in this version, Munch does not limit himself to depicting a historical event, but rather turns the scene into a meditation on the fragility of the human being, where death is not just a concrete fact, but an inevitable presence that lurks in every corner of existence. Number 19. The Voice, Summer Night, 1893. During the latter part of the 19th century, Edvard Munch began to develop a radically innovative pictorial language, characterized by an intense symbolic charge and a deep psychological introspection. In 1893 AD, in full experimentation with the effects of color and light, he created The Voice, Summer Night, one of his most evocative and poetic works. In it, the artist captures the melancholic atmosphere of a summer night on the shores of a Norwegian fjord, a recurring setting in his work. The painting is part of symbolism, an artistic movement that sought to express feelings and states of the soul through suggestive forms and emotionally charged colors. The use of color is a fundamental element in this work. The cool, ethereal tones, dominated by deep blue and the silvery reflection of the moon on the water, create a dreamlike feeling. The female figure, standing in the foreground, seems to be immersed in a state of silent contemplation. Her white dress stands out against the nighttime gloom, giving her a spectral and enigmatic presence. Munch uses loose, sinuous brushstrokes to accentuate the vibrancy of the landscape, generating a sense of imperceptible movement, as if the night breeze were gently stirring the scene. The very title, "The Voice," suggests the existence of an inaudible but deeply meaningful sound, like a whisper of nature or a latent emotion in the air. Within Munch's oeuvre, this painting reflects his constant interest in capturing moods through landscape and the human figure. The image of a solitary woman in a mysterious setting recurs in several of his compositions, functioning as a metaphor for longing, introspection, and loneliness. This painting, in particular, encapsulates the feeling of a night in which beauty and eeriness coexist in an almost supernatural balance. What is most intriguing is how Munch manages to convey the idea of a sound without needing to visually capture it, a feat that can only be achieved through the mastery of symbolic art. Number 18. Separation. 1896. In the context of 19th century art, few painters managed to capture emotional anguish with the intensity and honesty of Edvard Munch. In 1896 AD, in the midst of developing his most personal style, the Norwegian artist created Separation, one of his most moving works and representative of emotional rupture. As in many of his paintings from this period, Munch uses the love relationship as a starting point to explore pain and loss. The image is marked by a strong symbolic charge, in which the fragmentation and distance between the characters reinforce the feeling of emotional rupture. Munch's pictorial language in this work is unmistakable. Contrasting colors and distorted shapes underline the emotional intensity of the scene. The male figure in the foreground, who seems consumed by grief, is presented with a gaunt face and a rigid body. His dark hair seems to vanish into the air, as if he is losing part of himself in the process of separation. In the background, a woman dressed in white walks away, her silhouette blurred in the landscape, accentuating the feeling of distance. Munch uses sinuous lines and vibrant colors to manifest the tension between the two characters, conveying a feeling of irremediable loss. This painting is part of Munch's extensive cycle of works in which he addressed the theme of love and its devastating consequences. Part of his Frieze of Life, a series depicting various emotional stages of human beings, Separation is one of the key pieces to understand his exploration of the human psyche. His ability to express universal emotions through personal iconography has made this work endure as a timeless testimony to the suffering of love. Among the most fascinating details of this composition is the way in which Munch fuses the male figure with his surroundings, as if the pain of parting were capable of altering the very perception of reality. Number 17. The Sun, Oil. 1912. At the beginning of the 20th century, Edvard Munch explored new ways of depicting the vital energy of nature through color and light, moving away from the melancholy that dominated many of his previous works. The Sun, created in 1912 AD, is one of the most monumental pieces in his oeuvre, characterized by a vibrant and expansive composition that captures the radiant force of the star at its finest. Inspired by symbolism and the connection between humanity and nature, Munch designed this work as part of a series of murals for the University of Oslo, reflecting the idea of the sun as a source of knowledge, creation, and renewal. The painting shows a burst of golden light emanating from the center of the canvas, radiating outwards with dynamic brushstrokes and a masterful use of warm tones. On a technical level, the sun demonstrates Munch's skill in the application of vibrant colors and the fragmentation of light into multiple shades, an approach reminiscent of certain influences of post-impressionism but with a unique expressive and emotional charge. The work is distinguished by the intensity of its chromatic palette, with shades of yellow, orange, and red that contrast with the blue background, creating a striking visual drama. The rough texture of the paint and the broad, energetic brushstrokes reinforce the sensation of movement, giving the work an almost cosmic quality. Unlike many of his previous paintings, where existentialism and anguish predominated, here Munch presents a more optimistic, almost spiritual vision of the connection between human beings and nature and the universe. Within Munch's career, the sun occupies a key place, not only for being one of his most ambitious works in terms of scale and technique, but also for its impact on the perception of his art in Norway and the world. It was one of the main pieces in his decorative series for the University of Oslo, which consolidated his recognition as an artist of national importance. Furthermore, this approach towards a more abstract representation of nature and energy anticipated the evolution of European expressionism in the following decades. The painting is still admired for its visual intensity and for the way in which Munch managed to capture on a single canvas the essence of the sun as the primordial source of life, knowledge, and power. Number 16. Night on Karl Johan Street, 1892. In 1892 AD, Edvard Munch created Night on Karl Johan's Gate, one of his most disturbing and psychologically dense works, framed within the period when he was developing his characteristic expressionist style. The painting captures a night scene on the most important street in Oslo, Karl Johan's Gate, but far from being a costume-based representation, Munch transforms the urban space into a scene of oppression and anxiety. A group of figures walk towards the viewer, with expressionless and empty faces that evoke a feeling of alienation. In the background, the lights and shadows of the city mix in a hazy and suffocating atmosphere, emphasizing the isolation and anguish of modern life in the 19th century. The use of color and composition in this work reflects an absolute mastery in the manipulation of psychological perspective. The palette is composed of dark, muted tones, with shades of deep blue, black, and gray, which reinforce the feeling of emotional heaviness. The figures are arranged in a closed composition, with monochromatic faces and fixed gazes, generating a feeling of oppression. Munch also employs diagonal lines that lead the eye towards the crowd, creating an effect of immersion in the state of anxiety conveyed by the scene. Unlike Impressionist painting, which often glorified urban life, Munch transforms the city into a space of hopelessness and disorientation, anticipating the existential concerns that would mark 20th century art. Not only is this painting pivotal in the evolution of Munch's art, but it is also considered one of the earliest manifestations of the existential angst that would come to define Expressionism. At the same time he created this work, Munch was facing deep personal crises, which influenced his exploration of fear, loneliness, and alienation. Night on Karl Johan Street prefigures his most iconic work, The Scream, by sharing an intense emotional charge and a visual approach that blurs reality. The work remains striking because it manages to condense into a single image the feeling of helplessness in the midst of a crowd, a sentiment that has remained relevant throughout generations. Number 15. Starry Night, 1893. Throughout the 19th century, Western art underwent a radical transformation in its depiction of reality and human emotions. In 1893 AD, Edvard Munch created Starry Night, one of his most atmospheric and evocative works, where the night landscape becomes a reflection of the human psyche. Unlike Vincent van Gogh's famous painting of the same name, Munch does not seek to capture the dynamism of the sky, but rather to convey a sense of melancholy and contemplation through the interplay between darkness and light. The scene shows a deep, blue sky, streaked with stars that seem to float in a dreamlike atmosphere, while an aquatic landscape reinforces the feeling of immensity and solitude. In terms of technique, the work stands out for its expressive use of color and simplification of forms, which gives the scene an almost metaphysical character. Dark tones predominate in the composition, with shades of blue, black, and gray that convey a disturbing serenity. The brushstrokes are fluid and suggest subtle movement, as if nature were in a state of suspension. The composition is divided into three planes: the starry sky, the horizon line, and the surface of the water, creating a visual harmony that guides the viewer towards deep introspection. Munch uses starlight not as a realistic element, but as a symbol of the distance between humans and the cosmos, a recurring theme in his work. In Munch's career, Starry Night is a key piece in his exploration of nature as a reflection of emotional state. In this period, the artist increasingly moved away from the literal representation of reality, adopting a more symbolic and subjective approach. The work anticipates the evolution of expressionism by focusing on the transmission of feelings through atmosphere and color, rather than a detailed representation of the environment. The painting remains relevant for its ability to capture the melancholy and mystery of the night, establishing a bridge between late Impressionism and 20th century abstraction. Number 14. Self-Portrait with Burning Cigarette. 1895. In 1895 AD, Edvard Munch created Self-Portrait with Burning Cigarette, a work in which his face emerges from the shadows, barely illuminated by a flash of ghostly light that highlights his angular features. Painted at the height of the rise of symbolism and nascent expressionism, this portrait is not a simple representation of his physical image, but a visual introspection on his identity and emotional fragility. The haze of the cigarette fades into an impenetrable black background, evoking the uncertainty of his existence and the anguish that would mark his entire artistic career. This period was particularly crucial for Munch, who faced a deep psychological conflict, influenced by family losses and the tension of his social environment. Technically, the painting is characterized by a masterful use of chiaroscuro, recalling the Baroque tradition, but with a psychological intensity typical of the 19th century. The brushwork is loose and deliberate, highlighting the face with cool colors that contrast with the reddish warmth of the lit cigar. The position of the hands, barely outlined and almost floating in the darkness, adds a sense of unreality, as if the artist himself were fading into his work. The choice of muted tones reinforces his usual exploration of melancholy and anxiety, recurring elements in his work. The relevance of this work in Munch's career is unquestionable. Not only is it one of his most iconic self-portraits, but it also symbolizes his self-assertion in the European art scene. By the end of the 19th century, his style was already the subject of controversy, but with this painting, he consolidated his identity as an artist who explored the human psyche with unusual rawness. Curiously, this portrait ended up in the hands of prominent collectors of the time, which reinforced Munch's presence in the international art circuit. Number 13. Jealousy, Painting. 1895. Jealousy, created in 1895 AD, is one of Edvard Munch's most iconic works, not only for its emotional intensity but also for the way it addresses the complexity of human relationships. The scene depicts a love triangle with an almost tangible tension. A pale-faced man with a tormented expression looks anxiously at a woman dressed in white, while another man, with a relaxed posture, stands in the background. The drama of the composition is reinforced by the protagonist's fixed gaze, which radiates suffering and obsession. This work clearly reflects the impact of love and desire on the psyche, a theme that Munch explored repeatedly throughout his career. The painting features a vibrant color palette and expressive brushstrokes, elements that contribute to the sense of psychological tension. The green and reddish tones of the background create a contrast that accentuates the atmosphere of unease. Munch employs intentional distortion in the faces and perspective to intensify the sense of alienation and anguish. The female figure, in particular, appears ethereal and distant, like an unattainable object of desire, while the protagonist is immersed in a state of internal torment. This technique reinforces the sense of morbid jealousy that consumes the central character. The work is set at a key moment in Munch's artistic evolution, when his series on love and despair was reaching maturity. In the context of the 19th century, social conventions about romance and fidelity were being challenged by new currents of thought, and Munch captures this paradigm shift with an almost theatrical intensity. The painting has been the subject of multiple interpretations over time, some associating it with his personal experiences and others seeing it as a universal metaphor for the struggle between desire and possession. It is said that its inspiration may have arisen from his own emotional conflicts, although as in many of his works, ambiguity remains part of its power. Number 12. The Girls on the Bridge. 1901. In 1901 AD, Edvard Munch created The Girls on the Bridge, a work in which the landscape and the human figure merge in an atmosphere of lyricism and mystery. The scene depicts a group of young people on a wooden bridge, observing the waters of a river or lake, while the surroundings seem to distort into undulating shapes. Unlike his more distressing works, in this painting Munch presents a moment of apparent calm, although melancholy remains a latent element. The combination of female figures and nature suggests a symbolism associated with youth, the passage of time, and introspection. On a technical level, the painting stands out for its dynamic composition and the use of sinuous lines that evoke the movement of water and the flow of thought. The brushwork is expressive and the color palette, dominated by blue and orange tones, reinforces the dreamlike feeling. Munch deliberately plays with perspective, tilting the bridge and elongating the figures, which generates an unconventional effect of depth. The influence of Art Nouveau is perceptible in the stylization of natural elements, while the inspiration of post-impressionism is reflected in the free application of color. This work is a testament to Munch's interest in the interaction between humans and their environment. In the context of the 20th century, his art had already evolved towards greater emotional abstraction, moving away from simple figurative representation. The Girls on the Bridge is part of a series of versions of the same motif, demonstrating the importance of the theme in his production. Over time, this painting has been seen as one of his most poetic creations, in which the landscape takes on an almost metaphysical character. What is most fascinating is that, despite the apparent serenity, the work leaves a feeling of nostalgia, as if capturing a moment that fades into memory. Number 11. Melancholy. 1891. At the end of the 19th century, Europe was undergoing profound cultural and artistic transformations. Impressionism was beginning to lose its force while symbolism gained ground, exploring themes such as introspection, emotion, and subjectivity. In this context, Edvard Munch, influenced by the literature and philosophical thought of the time, created Melancholy, one of his most representative works of psychological exploration in painting. This piece not only reflects the feelings of his generation, but also anticipates Expressionism, a movement that would mark the 20th century. In it, sadness and loneliness are palpable, manifesting themselves through a carefully studied composition and a palette of cold and somber colors. The painting depicts a male figure with his face resting on one hand, in a gesture of deep introspection. His blank expression and lost gaze convey a sense of existential anguish. In the background, a coastal landscape can be seen, a recurring motif in Munch's work. Blue and green tones predominate, emphasizing the feeling of isolation and hopelessness. The loose brushwork and simplified forms reveal the artist's intention to capture emotions rather than realistic details. With this technique, Munch demonstrates his ability to capture psychological states through color and shape, elements that would define his personal style in the following years. Melancholia marks a crucial point in Munch's career, as it already reveals his interest in the internal conflicts of human beings. The work was inspired, in part, by the life of his friend Joppe Nilsson, who was going through a love crisis. Through painting, Munch achieves a fusion between the personal and the universal, making the viewer empathize with the feeling of desolation depicted. This piece also anticipates his iconic series The Frieze of Life, in which he would explore themes such as love, anxiety, and death in greater depth. It is curious that, despite its title, the figure portrayed in the work does not cry or show exaggerated signs of suffering, but rather its anguish is more subtle, almost silent, which makes it even more powerful in its emotional message. Number 10. The Kiss, 1897. During the 19th century, art began to move away from simply depicting the outside world and into an exploration of emotion and the human psyche. Edvard Munch, an artist whose work is marked by symbolism and existential angst, created the kiss in this context, addressing one of his recurring themes, love and its complexity. The painting is part of his series The Frieze of Life, in which he examines the darker aspects of human existence. In this work, Munch does not portray love from an idealized perspective, but rather presents it as a phenomenon in which individual identity is diluted in fusion with the other, evoking both passion and the loss of oneself. At first glance, the composition of the kiss is striking for its simplicity and, at the same time, for its emotional impact. Two human figures embrace each other in a deep kiss, but their faces and bodies merge into a single mass, blurring the boundaries between them. The scene is permeated with an oppressive atmosphere, with a dark background that encloses the action in a closed space, intensifying the feeling of intimacy. The brushwork is loose and dynamic, giving the work an ethereal, almost spectral character. Munch succeeds in conveying the feeling that, in the act of kissing, the two people lose their individuality and become a single entity, a visual metaphor that suggests both the ecstasy of love and its absorbing aspect. Munch's approach to human relationship in the kiss is a reflection of his own life and his vision of love. The fusion of the figures not only denotes passion, but also the dissolution of identity and the fear of the loss of individual autonomy. This vision aligns with the artist's experiences of love, marked by anxiety and emotional instability. Throughout his career, Munch would constantly return to this theme, exploring the intersection between love and suffering. Paradoxically, although the painting depicts a kiss, its visual execution makes it an image that is more disturbing than romantic, making it unique within the history of art. Number 9. Death in the Sick Room, 1893. The 19th century was marked by scientific and medical advances, but death remained a constant presence in everyday life. Against this backdrop, Edvard Munch, whose childhood was marked by illness and loss, painted Death in the Sick Room, a deeply personal and moving work. The piece is a testament to the impact that the deaths of his mother and sister Sophie, both victims of tuberculosis, had on his life. Munch channels his grief through painting, not as a simple act of remembrance, but as an exploration of grief and human helplessness in the face of loss. In the composition, the space is suffocating and the atmosphere charged with emotional tension. The scene shows several family members around a central void that suggests the presence of a deathbed. However, the sick woman's body is not visible, which intensifies the feeling of absence. Each figure reacts differently. Some characters cover their faces with their hands, while others seem in a state of reverie or resignation. The arrangement of the characters and the muted color palette reinforce the feeling of sadness and hopelessness. Munch's loose and expressive brushstrokes turn the space into a place that seems to be falling apart, reflecting the emotional fragility of the scene. Death in the Sick Room is one of Munch's most introspective paintings and one of the most representative of his vision of art as a means of exploring human emotions. Beyond being a simple scene of mourning, the work is a study of the psychological impact of death on the living. The influence of symbolism is evident in the way the artist does not simply narrate a fact, but rather builds an atmosphere charged with meaning. This approach would be key in the development of his later work, marking the beginning of his exploration of human anguish and suffering. An interesting detail is that, although the painting represents a moment of profound sadness, Munch does not resort to exaggerated dramatism, but allows the emptiness and restrained expression of the characters to speak for themselves, making the work even more powerful. Number 8. Ashes. 1894. In the year 1894 AD, Edvard Munch created Ashes, a painting that encapsulates the emotional and psychological intensity that characterizes his work. This period marked a key moment in the artist's career, in which he developed a visual language charged with symbolism and subjective expression. The scene depicted is a reflection of the emotional anguish and despair that dominate many of his paintings, framed within symbolism and nascent expressionism. The use of color and composition not only communicate the story of a love consumed by passion and hopelessness, but also invite the viewer to a deeper reflection on the fragility of human emotions. In the painting, we can see a red-haired woman dressed in white, with a lost look and an expression of apparent indifference, while, next to her, a man covers his face with his hands in a gesture of anguish. The scene takes place in a forest, a recurring setting in Munch's work, which here takes on a psychological dimension, with its dark tones and sinuous shapes that reinforce the atmosphere of tension. The loose brushstrokes and chromatic intensity underline the drama of the image, creating a feeling of emotional instability. The symbolism of the woman's red hair and white clothing refer to the idea of temptation and lost innocence, fundamental elements within the artist's pictorial universe. This painting not only reflects Munch's personal experiences, especially in relation to his complex love relationships, but also engages with an artistic movement that explored existential anxiety and human vulnerability. Ashes is one of the painter's most emblematic works, combining his exploration of love, despair, and melancholy with a composition charged with psychological tension. The way in which the artist manages to transform an apparently everyday scene into an emotional whirlwind demonstrates his mastery in the representation of the human soul. Number 7. Anxiety. 1894. In 1894 AD, Edvard Munch painted Anxiety, a work in which he captured the feeling of collective anguish with a visual intensity that only he could achieve. The painting is an extension of the emotional universe developed in the Scream, but in this case, the despair is not found in a single individual, but in a group of figures who seem to share a state of deep restlessness. This piece is a manifestation of the spirit of the 19th century, in which modernity brought with it both advances and a sense of alienation and existential crisis. Munch, influenced by his personal experiences and his perception of the world, captured this feeling with an unmatched visual force. The work presents a group of people walking towards the viewer, their faces marked by an inexplicable anguish. Their empty eyes and rigid expressions suggest an inner despair, as if they all share the same grim fate. The sky, dyed a fiery red, creates a sense of suffocation and imminent threat, while the undulating landscape reinforces the feeling of disorientation. The closed composition and repetition of faces suggest the uniformity of despair, showing how fear and anxiety can be collective feelings, not just individual ones. This painting is one of the most striking depictions of existential unrest in Munch's oeuvre, preempting many of the concerns that would define 20th century art. The artist's ability to synthesize abstract feelings into concrete images positions him as one of the key figures of symbolism and expressionism. Through anxiety, Munch left a lasting impression on how art can capture universal emotions with extraordinary simplicity and depth, establishing an intimate connection with the viewer's psyche. Number 6. Naked Girl, Puberty. From 1894 to 1895. Between 1894 and 1895 AD, Edvard Munch created Puberty, a work that addresses the transition between childhood and adulthood with a rawness and sincerity that has made it one of his most disturbing paintings. This piece belongs to a period in which the artist was exploring themes related to psychological development and emotional fragility, inspired by his own life and the changes he observed in society. In Puberty, Munch depicts a young woman sitting on the edge of a bed, her body naked and an expression that mixes uncertainty and fear. The work is a visual testimony of the emotional awakening and anxiety that accompanies the arrival of adolescence. One of the most striking aspects of the painting is the way light and shadow interact with the young woman's figure. The dark background and illuminated face create a dramatic contrast that accentuates the psychological tension of the scene. Furthermore, the presence of an ominous shadow projected on the wall reinforces the feeling of unease, as if representing the protagonist's inner fears or the surveillance of an invisible presence. The way Munch treats the young woman's body, without idealization or eroticization, contributes to the feeling of vulnerability and isolation, making this work one of the most direct and heartbreaking in its exploration of human development. Within Munch's career, Puberty is a key work, as it encapsulates many of the recurring themes in his work: loneliness, fear, and transformation. His psychological approach and expressive style influenced generations of artists who sought to represent the complexity of the human experience beyond physical appearance. The emotional tension conveyed by the painting continues to resonate today, making it a timeless piece that invites introspection and reflection on moments of change in life. Number 5. Love and Pain, Vampire. From 1893 to 1895. In the context of late 19th century European art, marked by a strong exploration of the human psyche and a move away from idealized representations of reality, Edvard Munch developed a deeply introspective visual language full of symbolism. Love and Pain, later known as Vampire, is one of the most enigmatic and representative pieces of this stage in his career. The work shows a red-haired woman leaning her face on the neck of a dejected man, in a scene of intimacy that has been interpreted in multiple ways. Although the original title alluded to an emotional relationship marked by suffering, the subsequent name, Vampire, transformed its meaning into something more sinister and supernatural. The influence of Munch's emotional conflicts, as well as his vision of human relationships as a space of passion and destruction, is evident in the expressive force of the painting. Technically, Munch employs a loose brushstroke and a restricted but highly symbolic range of colors. The reddish hue of the woman's hair contrasts with the paleness of the man's skin, creating a sense of contrast between life and death. The blurred contours and visible brushstrokes reinforce the idea of a world where emotions blur between reality and dream. The technique of Impressionism and Post-Impressionism influenced his use of color and light, but Munch went further, incorporating a drama that anticipated 20th-century Expressionism, a movement that would find a source of inspiration in his work. This painting not only marked a milestone in his artistic evolution, but also consolidated his reputation as a painter capable of rendering existential torment in images of great intensity. His obsession with human fragility and love as an inexhaustible source of anguish is a recurring theme in his work. The transformation of the title of the work, from Love and Pain to Vampire, is testimony to how the public's reception can modify the perception of a painting. The image, which at first evoked the embrace of a couple trapped in a self-destructive relationship, became an icon of the soul-devouring femme fatale, a recurring figure in late 19th century literature and art. Number 4. The Dance of Life. From 1899 to 1900. At the end of the 19th century, Edvard Munch was at the height of his artistic maturity, developing a pictorial language full of symbolism and exploring in greater depth the themes that would define his work. The Dance of Life is a clear example of his obsession with the human condition, the passing of time, and the inevitable transformation of emotions. The scene, set on a moonlit night by the sea, features several couples dancing, but the focus of the composition is on three female figures representing different stages of a woman's life. Munch uses this narrative device to condense the fleeting nature of existence into a single image, in a context where love and loneliness are inevitably intertwined. On a technical level, the work stands out for its expressive lines and the almost theatrical arrangement of the characters. The vibrant colors, predominantly red and yellow, contrast with the dark tones that surround the dancers, creating a dreamlike atmosphere. The central figure, a woman dressed in red who seems to merge with her dance partner, symbolizes passion and loving plenitude. To her left, a woman in white, with a serene and distant expression, represents innocence and youth. On the far right, a woman dressed in black with a melancholic face embodies old age and resignation. This compositional structure gives the work a cyclical character, suggesting that life passes in a constant movement of encounters and farewells. The Dance of Life is part of the series, The Frieze of Life, a set of works in which Munch expressed his vision of human existence as a succession of moments marked by desire, anguish, and death. His interest in psychology, influenced by the thought of philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche and the emerging psychoanalytic theories of the 19th century, led him to represent emotions in a way that transcended visible reality. This painting, in particular, became one of his most representative works, as it encapsulates his tragic and passionate look at human destiny. The repetition of the moon in several of his works suggests a cyclical and eternal element, reinforcing the idea that the dance of life never stops. Number 3. The Sick Child. From 1885 to 1886. In the context of late 19th century Norway, marked by a transition between tradition and modernity, Edvard Munch began to intensely explore his childhood memories and the feelings of loss that accompanied him throughout his life. The Sick Child is one of his first masterpieces and one of his most personal, as it is inspired by the death of his sister Sophie from tuberculosis when he was only 14 years old. The painting is a testimony to the pain of loss, a recurring theme in his work, and a turning point in his artistic development, as it represents a distancing from academic painting and an approach to the subjective exploration of reality. The technique used in this work is of great importance in his career. Munch uses loose, fragmented brushstrokes, with an almost rough texture that reflects the fragility of the moment depicted. The muted colors and sober composition reinforce the feeling of grief and hopelessness. The central figure, a pale-skinned girl with an absent gaze, seems to cling to life while an older woman, possibly her mother, bows her head in a gesture of resignation. The scene is not only a representation of illness, but also of human helplessness in the face of death, a theme that Munch would explore repeatedly in his later works. This painting was met with harsh criticism when it was first presented, due to its unconventional style and overwhelming emotional charge. However, over time, it became one of his most valued works, precisely because of its ability to convey pain with raw, unpretentious sincerity. The Sick Child marked a before and after in Munch's career, consolidating him as an artist who was not afraid to capture the deepest and most traumatic emotions on his canvases. The artist's insistence on revisiting this scene in multiple versions throughout his life shows that, beyond being an artistic theme, it was an emotional wound that never fully healed. Number 2. Madonna. From 1894 to 1895. Within Edvard Munch's oeuvre, Madonna occupies a special place, not only for its technical execution, but for its powerful symbolic charge and its reinterpretation of one of the most iconic images of Christian art. Created between 1894 and 1895, at the height of the symbolism movement, this work challenges the traditional representation of the Virgin Mary, replacing idealized purity with a disturbing and sensual vision of the sacred. At a time when Victorian morality imposed strict rules on the body and sexuality, Munch introduces an image of the woman that is at once divine and carnal, mystical and erotic, reflecting his ambiguous vision of femininity. Technically, Madonna is a testament to Munch's masterful use of color and composition. The female figure, in a trance-like state, is immersed in a dark, undefined background that emphasizes her ethereal presence. The curve of her body, her bent face and her ecstatic expression evoke a moment of ecstasy that challenges the boundaries between devotion and desire. The reddish tones surrounding her figure and the irregular halo reinforce the idea of an ambiguous sacredness, where sensuality is not excluded but integrated into the divine. In some lithographic versions of the work, Munch adds a provocative detail, a small fetus in the corner, reinforcing the duality between creation and death, birth and sacrifice. The importance of Madonna in Munch's career lies in its ability to subvert established iconographies, anticipating debates about sexuality and spirituality that would gain momentum in the 20th century. The work was received with scandal at the time, reflecting the clash between tradition and modernity. However, its impact transcended initial criticism and became one of the most representative pieces of his exploration of human psychology. The combination of the sacred and the carnal in Madonna not only challenged the values of its time, but remains a reminder of the complexity of desire and devotion in the human experience. Number 1. The Scream. 1893. At the end of the 19th century, the world was undergoing a profound transformation. The Industrial Revolution had radically changed daily life, cities were growing at an uncontrolled pace, and European society was torn between technological progress and growing existential anxiety. Against this backdrop of change and tension, Edvard Munch, a Norwegian artist influenced by symbolism and post-impressionism, captured one of the most haunting and memorable images in the history of art in the Scream. Created in 1893, the work reflects the profound anxiety of human beings in a world that was becoming increasingly uncertain. Inspired by a personal experience in which he felt an endless scream piercing through nature, Munch transferred this emotion to canvas with raw and striking expressionism. Technically, the scream is a revolutionary work. Its composition, with undulating lines and a vibrant but disturbing use of color, breaks with the traditional conventions of academic painting. The incandescent red sky, the distorted landscape, and the central figure with his face in absolute panic create a sense of disturbance that transcends time. Munch used the technique of tempera and pastel on cardboard, achieving a loose and expressive stroke that emphasizes the feeling of anguish. His style, which anticipates 20th-century expressionism, shows a profound disdain for realistic representation, prioritizing emotion over form. The repetition of this image in various versions and techniques, oil, lithography, and pastel, demonstrates the artist's obsession with this motif, making it a universal symbol of despair. In Munch's career, the scream represents a turning point. Its exploration of psychological states and its departure from traditional beauty paved the way for later movements such as German Expressionism. The work has been the subject of countless interpretations and analysis, from psychoanalytic studies to references in popular culture. Stolen on more than one occasion and recovered after complex investigations, its history has only helped to consolidate its mythical aura. Like a persistent echo of human anguish, the scream continues to provoke in viewers a visceral response that few paintings in the history of art have achieved. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.